2, 1, go.
Good evening. I'm Sean Decatur, President at Kenyon College, and welcome to the 8th and final event in this year's Hill to Hill series. Hill to Hill was created in 2016 by Kenyon's Center for the Study of American Democracy, or CSAD, in conjunction with the Washington, D.C. Alumni Group as a way to connect Kenyon to the broader practice of American democracy, linking our Hill in Gambier with Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., that place where the representatives of we the people gather to deliberate and chart our common fate. Over the past 8 months, CSAD, in conjunction with the Office for Alumni and Parent Engagement, has drawn upon Kenyon's deep reservoir of alumni, parents, faculty, and friends engaged with and committed to American democracy to consider the question, is the American experiment still viable? The title of tonight's panel is An American Transformation. We currently find ourselves at a liminal point in American history in which the multiple interlocking crises over the past year appear to be resolving, but whose ultimate effects on our society and our democracy remain shrouded in fog. A global pandemic that killed nearly 600,000 of our fellow citizens is coming under control, but the substantial disruptions to nearly every aspect of our lives continue to linger. Economic inequality is deepened and millions remain unemployed. The widespread social unrest that erupted last summer with the police killing of George Floyd has receded, but the underlying causes of racial inequities have yet to be systematically addressed. We witnessed a successful transition to presidential power despite the severe testing of American democratic norms and institutions, yet the election and its violent aftermath remain mired in controversy as the former president and many of his supporters refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of its successor. Finally, incipient efforts to rebuild a sense of common purpose and constructive dialogue across our political divides appear ready to fall victim to the scorched earth politics of negative partisanship and partisan advantage. To help us better understand these issues and how they may transform the nature of American politics and American democracy, we have assembled tonight's panel. But before I hand over tonight's events to David Rowe, Professor of Political Science and the Director of our Center for the Study of American Democracy, to introduce tonight's guests and moderate the discussion, let me briefly thank the many who made this evening possible. This includes the Offices of Alumni and Parent Engagement, Communication and Advancement, especially Lindsay Colopy, Adam Gilson, Annie Gordon, and Kent Woodward-Ginther. We also would like to thank the Center for Study of American Democracy, especially Andrea Leckleitner and Nancy Powers, as well as the Center's student associates, including Teresa Carr, class of 23, and William Yannick, class of 23, even though they are now on summer break. All have worked tirelessly since the summer of 2020 to plan the series of events that were held this year. And we also would like to thank all of the alumni, faculty, parents, and friends of the college whom we consulted as we put this program together, and all of you who have tuned in tonight. So with that, I'd like to hand things over to Professor Rowe.
All right. Thank you, Sean, and good evening, everyone. My name is David Rowe, and I am the Director of the Center for the Study of American Democracy here at Kenyon College. I am delighted to welcome you tonight to our 8th and final panel of this year's Hill to Hill series, Is the American Experiment Still Viable? Tonight's panel will be at the same time retrospective and prospective, considering the events we have witnessed over the past year, what they may reveal about the health of our democracy, what's happening today, and what they may imply for the future. To get a better sense of the path we have traveled, where we are, and the choices that lie ahead, I am delighted to welcome a distinguished panel of four Kenyon parents and alumni this evening. Bob Bauer, parent of class of 10, is currently professor of practice and distinguished scholar in residence at New York University School of Law and co-author with Jack Goldsmith of the book After Trump, Reconstructing the Presidency. He has also served as White House counsel to Barack Obama and was recently appointed co-chair of the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. Jeff Bridges, class of 03, is a Democratic member of the Colorado Senate representing District 26, one of the most economically diverse and electorally competitive districts in the state. Prior to his time in the Senate, he served in the Colorado House of Representatives and has been a fierce advocate for the transition to renewable energy to create a healthier world. The Colorado legislature is, as we speak, in session, and he may have to pop out from time to time in order either to speak on a bill or actually vote for one, and also apologizes if at times his internet is glitchy because he has to be located very close to the chambers. Sarah Longwell, class of '02, is a longtime Republican strategist and the president and CEO of Longwell Partners, a Washington, D.C. communications firm focused on fostering cross-partisan coalitions. She is also the publisher of Bulwark and serves as the executive director of Defending Democracy Together. She was previously a partner in the public affairs firm Berman and Company, as well as the national chair of the board of Log Cabin Republicans. Marilyn Shields, class of '00, class of 2000, is a shareholder with the law firm Fitzpatrick, Lentz, and Bubba, and a candidate for judge in the Lehigh County Court of Common Pleas. Word on the street is that she absolutely crushed it in yesterday's primary election and now stands as the Democratic candidate for that judgeship. Please note that the panelists tonight are speaking in their personal capacities only, and at times may be unable to answer or address certain questions. Note too that we intend tonight's discussion not to be a partisan debate or a scoring of partisan points, but strive instead for a constructive, probing, and civic dialogue that takes others seriously and seeks to generate greater understanding about the consequential forces at play in American democracy. After about 30 minutes of discussion, we will begin to entertain questions from the audience, which you may post in the chat accompanying the YouTube stream. We will try to cover as many of the questions as possible, but may take them out of order or incorporate them with other questions in order to maintain the flow of conversation, and ask as well that when you participate in the live stream chat, that you use your real name. Please then join me in welcoming this evening Bob, Jeff, Sarah, and Marilyn. Okay, guys. Where I'd like to begin this evening is really just to get a sense of where we are right now and sort of where you see us located in sort of American democracy, the current, the current era in American democracy, because it seems to me that this is a really unusual period, because on the one hand, what we see is American democracy working normally. We've had a presidential transition. We've celebrated, the 100 days of the Biden administration. In some ways, politics has even become sort of boring and returned to patterns that are very familiar to all of us. But cut other ways, right? Our current situation seems very unsettled and very, sort of threatening. There are storm clouds on the horizon. So, for example, we had the protests, the racial protests last summer, but we've seen the conviction of Derek Chauvin, and yet at the same time, we understand as well that the problems of systemic racism still are not adequately addressed by our political system. We've had a presidential transfer of power, and yet we know that the former president, refuses to concede the election, and that many of his supporters either implicitly or explicitly, sort of promulgate the big lie that the election was somehow stolen. And so what I would like to get from you tonight to begin the conversation is, where are we? Is the glass of American democracy half full, in the sense that we've made it through a very difficult period and American institutions have proved strong and resilient and will recover? Or is it half empty? Yes, we face severe challenges. We're not out of the woods, and that there are a number of ways in which American democracy could face even stronger challenges in the future. And so, where do you see us, and what does that for you imply about how we should be thinking about both this moment and the future? And Bob, I'm just going to start with you because I'm following the alphabet.
You have to unmute.
My mistake. Sorry about that. I think I would begin by saying I'm not very good at predicting the future or seeing whether we're on a particular slide to a particular result at the moment. But I do want to say something about how the institutions held up over the last 4 years and through the final resolution of the election, notwithstanding, as you said, some continuing fighting over whether or not the president will ever accept this election, whether his supporters will ever believe that it wasn't stolen. This was obviously a very difficult situation, very perilous. The peaceful transition of power was challenged. This president, former President Trump, unlike any before him, did everything he could to obstruct the transition of power. So the normal transition processes didn't work the way they were supposed to, and it put the country, particularly in the middle of the pandemic, at peril, because as we all know, there's a very short period of time between the end of one administration and the beginning of the other. And so an effective and peaceful transition with full cooperation from the outgoing administration is really critical to the national welfare. And at this time of pandemic and economic dislocation, perhaps more so than in any other set of circumstances outside of the middle of warfare. And what is striking is that while there was, of course, a rawness in that experience, rather than, quote, moving on, it seems that there is absolute backsliding along those issues. That is to say, there's no resolution that upholds the way the institutions operated on anything that resembles a bipartisan basis. We have the Republican leader in the House who is now urging, as I believe Leader McConnell did today on the Senate side, that his party not participate in a January 6th commission to inquire into the events of that day. We have the ongoing attack by former President Trump on the electoral process. We have state legislatures around the country, Republican state legislatures, that are making various efforts to reinforce the narrative of a stolen election and to make various institutional and other rules changes to basically vindicate that narrative. So I think we're in a very, very tricky period of time. And I can't say, I'll just conclude by saying, I can't say that I predicted on January 7th that this is where we were today. I think I was overly optimistic.
Okay. Sarah?
Yeah, I would say I agree with most of that. I mean, glass half full, glass half empty. I'm never going to short America, so I'm always glass half full. But I've also been shocked by post January 6th. I remember doing a call with somebody after January 6th, and the guy said, you know, I just got my first really good night of sleep because I know that Trump's done. And I said, I don't know about that. And I think that one of the things that should frighten people the most is that after inciting an insurrection, which some people don't think is the case, but I certainly do, that the president not only wasn't held accountable and didn't suffer a penalty, but is potentially stronger now, in a stronger position, because we all now know that there is basically no limit to what he can do. He can create an attack on the seat of democracy, disrupt the peaceful transition of power, and his own party will not hold him accountable. Also, not only is the lie that he told that caused that insurrection not being, it should, in a healthier environment, right, we would look at that happening and say, that lie would be off limits. Like everybody would stop telling it because this terrible thing had just happened. And instead, you know, you look at the purging of Liz Cheney. So kicking Liz Cheney out of leadership, they said, well, she's off message. And what they mean by that is our message is that the election was stolen, and she's saying that it's not. And the bills that that Bob referenced, the voting restriction bills that we're advancing in the states, some of them are not as bad as people make them out to be. They're not Jim Crow 2.0, but they are all predicated. So they vary in whether they're either not that big a deal or some of them are bad and some of them are restrictive. But at the end of the day, they are all predicated on the idea that there was something untoward, something wrong, that the election was rigged. I mean, even the bill in Georgia that got a lot of attention wasn't practically that bad. What the problem was that Kemp, the governor there in Georgia, wanted to make sure that he was perceived as doing something. And all of it is about creating this narrative that the election was stolen. And I think when you have a political party that is participating in a lie that big, and you have 70% of the voters that believe that the election was stolen. I do these focus groups with Republicans all the time. You hear them say it. They think it was stolen. They think that what happened on January 6th wasn't that big a deal, that the media totally overhyped it, that it was mostly peaceful and fine. What I think is going on, and the thing that concerns me the most, is that we really are living not just in siloed information bubbles, but in completely different realities where we can see the same thing happen. And over time, we can have a completely, like, everyone had roughly the same opinion about it. Like the day of, Kevin McCarthy, other Republicans, this is bad. You know, Mitch McConnell says Donald Trump is morally and practically responsible for what happened. And then 2 months go by and they say, what insurrection? And for me, for a democracy to thrive, you do have to be tethered to the truth. And I think that's the part that has me the most alarmed.
Okay. Marilyn, would you like to comment on this? And again, congratulations.
Glass half empty, glass half full. I'm a Black woman living in America, so I'm going to not answer that question. What I'll say, no, I will answer that question. I think to be running for judge means I think this is still worth trying, right? I think there is something worth fighting for here. But you can't be a student of history. You cannot have been a political science major without thinking about the ways that regimes are rise and fall. And you can't help but wonder if we're at the end of something in America. You know, Ottoman Empire came, you know, the assumption for many Americans, and, you know, this is tied to the myth of American exceptionalism, is that this was always the greatest place and it will always be the greatest place. And we don't have to really work very hard for it to continue to be the greatest place. And from my perspective, that's always been false. That's always, that democracy, if it's worth anything, is something that you're going to have to work on constantly. And it requires a media that's willing to call balls and strikes and tell the truth. It requires political actors who are operating from a place of honesty and not just naked power. And right now, that's not happening. Those norms we watched through, and this did not begin, I don't want to suggest that this began or ended with Trump, but we saw the norm breaking, the lying, and no one really doing anything about it. And I feel like the culmination of that was January 6th, and how quickly some people turned the switch. I have a personal friend of mine, Susan Wild. She's our congresswoman here in the Lehigh Valley, who was in a very famous photograph, crouching on the floor, having just called her children, not certain whether she was ever going to see them again. And perhaps it's because I know her personally, she is a friend, that I could not possibly let that go so easily as just fun and games. You know, I watched the video of a woman shot at nearly point blank range by a Capitol police officer trying to protect the Capitol. So I cannot suggest that it was just fun, a good time. Our building, we can do what we want there as we smear feces all over the place. So where are we? I think it remains to be seen. I think there are a lot of very good people pushing very hard, fighting very hard to save this democracy, but I don't want to assume that it will always exist. I think we've got to get out of, if this is going to exist, we've got to get out of that mindset as Americans. I keep looking at Jeff's face. Jeff and I have to stop and say, Jeff and I attended Kenyon together, and I remember sitting outside of Gambier Deli, and like, it's just so cool seeing him here. And like, I'm sorry.
All right. Well,
did I answer your question?
Yeah, Jeff, you just take the ball and run with it.
It's so good to see you too. And we've got 3 people here on today that were all at Kenyon at the same time. So I think it was a very special time at Kenyon, clearly. And Kenyon's a very special place. I would say, you know, given, I love the way looking at the larger history, right? I think that's definitely something we need to do. If you look at the larger history of America, we've been on a knife's edge, like basically the entire time we've existed, and generally a knife's edge of our own making, right? And every time we have come out the other end, more or less on the right side of that knife's edge. But it takes work and it takes fighting. And as Sarah said, I'm never going to bet against America. We've come out the other side well every time. But if you look at the more narrow history, my memory is that Bill Clinton drove the Republicans further to the right. They're like, this guy, oh, I can't believe what he did in the Oval Office, all these affairs, oh, or even just the one, like, this isn't what the presidency should be, and it drove them further away. And then George Bush came and Democrats were like, oh, this guy's a moron. I can't believe someone like this would ever be president. And it drove them further to the left. And then Barack Obama came and you saw the Tea Party and you saw this sort of latent racism that we have in our country push a whole block of Republicans further to the right. And then you have Trump, who I think is a categorical difference, but certainly in line with continuing to push folks further and further apart. So I think we're at an inflection point. It is not half full or half empty. It is a time where something is going to change and change in a big way, as it has many times in American history. And it is up to us to make sure that we end up on the right side of that knife's edge.
All right. Well, and I think you phrased the problem well, but the question is how do we know how to push so that we fall the right way off that knife's edge?
So I would say that to finish the thought, I think we've elected someone in Joe Biden who, like, unless there's something I don't know about, it is tough to characterize this guy as a crazy nut job left winger, right? Like, he is, for all sorts of structural and systemic reasons that are problematic in their own right, but for all sorts of reasons also having to do with his history and his policy positions and the agenda that he's pursuing, it is tough to paint him as some sort of ultra left-wing liberal that's going to drive the country further apart. I know there are efforts, people are trying to do that. He stole the election, but the first thing he's doing is he's just like, it's money for everybody in America. It's not the ACA. It's not trying to fix immigration. It's hard to be against money for state and local governments and infrastructure and all of those different things. So I don't see this president as continuing that pattern of driving folks further and further apart. I think that he is going, I hope, my experience so far is that he is the kind of guy who's going to bring things more together, despite what Mitch McConnell does in the Senate. We all know Mitch McConnell is going to Mitch. But I think with this president, it's going to be tough for Republicans to draw that narrative.
Okay, I like the phrase "Mitch is going to Mitch." I just want to put that out there. But all of you have brought up, sort of the importance of history or historical events or truth in some way. Sarah, mentioned, tethered to the truth. Marilyn, says, look, you have to think about rise and fall, and so that raises the question of how do we create a common narrative of what is the truth, or how do we find the truth? And so, how important is the truth to sort of figuring out where we are today? What do we need to do to get it? I mean, and is there a way of seeking truth or tethering ourselves to truth that can lead to a world that we all agree on? Because one of the things that, springs to my mind when I think about the problem of tethering to truth is that, this is precisely what, say, the January 6th commission is supposed to do, is supposed to, look at a deeper level than you can, through a series of cake courses as the Justice Department prosecutes people who are in the Capitol, to look at a deeper level about what led to this insurrection. But also this idea of how do we generate truth, right, underlies the controversies surrounding, say, the 1619 Project. Both of these, show that this idea of trying to get at truth in some ways can't be disentangled from partisanship, or at least political position, because often we interpret the past not with an objective eye to what happened, but with a sense of what that enables us to do about the future. And so is there a way that you guys see where inside our political system as it exists now, that we can really begin a dialogue that helps us at least begin to generate common narrative about where we are, and especially some of the real challenges that we face? And would anyone like to go first, or shall I just pick? Sarah, you said tethered to truth, so I will start with you.
Well, Bob raised his hand. I mean, you're not asking like a small question here. This is like the whole ball game, kind of. And you know, so here's something that I think about a lot when I do the focus groups. So I talk to mostly Trump voters, and one of the things is you'll talk to these people, you know, from central Pennsylvania, where I'm from, and there'll be a 60-year-old woman, maybe a former school teacher. She'll say, "I don't know what to believe anymore. Like, I'm getting all this information, and I hear this thing about QAnon, and I don't think JFK Jr. is alive, but some of it makes sense." And there's this sort of desperation for trying to understand what's true, but there's this feeling like they can't. And truth is a bit of a moving target. I mean, I still believe that there are things that are objectively true, that you should seek truth, but like so much of finding truth is in the friction of conversation and people, you know, talking to each other, right? It's the reason that we have free speech, is so that we can confront each other with different positions and ultimately try to seek out the truth. That's not really what's happening, because the information streams are so siloed that what you have are people, and people have become, there's this thing, and part of when I was a conservative, right? When I was a young kid, I had this, I said, question everything was like on my trapper keeper. And there's this instinct in Americans that I think is a healthy instinct, that is to question things and to not automatically swallow narratives, whatever, that's kind of gone into overdrive. It's gone into this place where it is no longer healthy, where everything that we do is to assume that, you know, like, I mean, I hear this all the time. It's like the big lie in QAnon. It's all comes from the same place of, I don't really know what's true. And now I believe that the deep state is running everything, and that there are, you know, that the election was stolen, and that there's a cabal of pedophiles in Washington and in Hollywood, and they're all conspiring against me, the individual, and Trump is fighting them. I mean, like, there's a reason that 70% of Republicans think the election was stolen. It's because they believe a lot of stuff that's not true. And it's because there's a toxic information environment. You know, I talk sometimes about this Republican triangle of doom, which is the relationship between the elected officials in the Republican Party, the right-wing infotainment media sphere, and the voters. And they're like in this toxic feedback loop where Republican voters, you know, after the election, it's not like the majority of Republican voters thought the election was stolen. Some percentage did, like 30%. But then the elected officials started saying that it was stolen, and the media ecosystem started saying it was stolen, and it layered into each other until more and more people were like, yeah, I don't know about those ballots that came in the middle of the night. And then you find yourself in where an entire political party lives in a different reality. And so it is essential that we have some shared narratives. Like that is essential to a democracy. And that's the part that I feel like we're losing. And I guess because the media ecosystems are becoming more and more polarized, it's getting harder and harder to engage with each other, to like search for that truth. So that's not my most optimistic answer, but it's the things that comes to mind. I know I'm defining the problem. I will just say on glass half full, glass half empty, it's like they just voted on the commission. I've been sitting here looking at it, and 35 Republicans voted to have the commission. That is a glass full situation for me in terms of where we are. That 35, it's terrible. That means like 170 voted no. But the fact that you could get 35 to affirm that it was important that there was a bipartisan consensus that we should investigate this so that it doesn't happen again actually gives me some hope.
Okay, Bob, I'm going to go over to you since you raised your hand at the very beginning.
No, I think that's very useful. I was thinking as I was listening to Sarah and the question of, you know, how do we measure the glass, that I agree that 35 today seems like a sign of hope. I think we would have thought the number immediately after January 6th, January 8th, 10th, 15th, we would have thought the number would have been well north of 100. And so our expectations have been shaved down, I think. But the other point I want to add to what Sarah has said, which was both interesting and I also think, I completely agree with this line of analysis, is that I am concerned about the absence of what I call a civil society voice on these some fundamental institutional defenses. I don't want to glorify, it's very easy to glorify, particularly at my age, what happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. But what is missing, I think, what I've seen missing in moments of institutional crisis recently are community leadership organizations that have standing within local communities that can help orient them toward some basic standard of truth. When Sarah mentioned the triangle of doom, elected officials, the media, and voters, I was thinking, well, that's absolutely correct. Where's the legal profession? Where's the ecclesiastical community? Where is the philanthropic community? Where is the higher educational community? And I fear that what we're seeing is a balkanization following the very polarized lines of conflict in the United States that has infected even that sphere. So it can't play a mediating role or an educational role in the way that I would have hoped it could. And I think in some past American experience, and as I said, I don't want to overstate the case, I think that it did play. And I think that's another reason why I probably incline a little bit more to the half empty, because I think that this truth crisis that we have, absence of authority, the desperate people in the focus group that Sarah just recounted who are looking for some place to go, that has now, I think, infected every corner of the society and gone beyond merely the political institutions, but also disabled the ability of community leadership organizations to play that role.
Yeah, and Jeff and then Marilee.
Yeah, I think what Bob is referring to is something from another Bob Putnam, social capital. Bowling Alone. I think Bowling Alone was written like 2 decades ago now, and is more true than it was even back then. People just don't have social capital. We don't have Elks clubs. We don't have bowling leagues. The socializing that used to happen outside of work and outside of the home now takes place on this and on our laptops. And it is with other people who already agree with everything we already think, because that's what the algorithm delivers to us. So there is a way in which these really isolated, these different worlds that both Sarah and Bob were talking about, like that's the reality for so many people. And I consider myself really lucky to be in the legislature because I have really, really good friends who voted for Donald Trump, and they are still really good friends of mine. They're legislators, and I interact and we talk, and so many of my friends, my progressive friends outside of the legislature, don't have those kinds of relationships. They don't have those interactions, and we are failing to see each other as human beings. There's the caricature of what it means to be, these Democratic politicians, this, the pedophilia rings that are running out of pizza shops in the basement, and the pizza shop doesn't have a basement. And by the way, the only really clear evidence of a pedophile is like Trump's best friend and a member of Congress who's a Republican. So it is just this crazy multiple reality world that we're living in. And I have hope that we are addressing some of those social media concerns, some of those algorithm concerns at the national level. But I think the space that this president may allow us to carve out is that we're not going to cut off friendships with other people because they don't like Joe Biden or they do like Joe Biden. Like I don't think that's the place that this presidency pushes people towards in the way that really every presidency since Bill Clinton has, I think, pushed people in that direction.
Okay, Marilee.
I have 2 thoughts in my head. I don't know that they will meet each other, but let me just begin. The concept of truth. When you mentioned the 1619 Project, I think truth has a lot to do with who's telling the story. And for so long in this country, the story hasn't been told by women, by minorities, by indigenous people. And you're getting some pushback. People that look like me are saying, no, that's not how we saw slavery. That slavery is not a bygone thing. There was the whole Reconstruction thing, and it was really bad. And as Black and brown indigenous people, women are gaining power, they are challenging the narratives that we've lived with for so many years and saying, that's not exactly how it happened. That's not accurate. That's not truth. And that is an important thing. That is a good thing. It's long past time. You know, we all know the saying, history is told by the victors. And maybe what we're reckoning with now is the sides are changing. The winning team isn't winning right now, and other people are telling the story. And that is very disquieting to people who have lived with a different narrative. And I think it's important to understand that, to give voice to that, to recognize that, not necessarily bow to that, but understand that that is a ground shifting thing that is happening. It is an important and necessary thing, but it is ground shifting. So that's one thought. Second thought, Sarah was talking about living in a different reality, and I think there are people living in a different reality. I think there are other people that are making a living off of helping people live in a different reality and know absolutely what truth is. But we have a system right now that has commoditized infotainment, as Sarah described it. And I think some of these talking heads know good and damn well what happened, but they are willing for money, for power, to play this game. And it is a very dangerous game that could be disastrous for this nation, but they're playing that game. And I just want to put that marker in the sand and say that, yes, I do think there are people that are susceptible, that are falling into the QAnon Pizza Gate trap. But I think there are others who are preying upon and using, and the degree to which we're siloed off, the degree to which social media will give you that feedback loop and are happy to do it. Because again, you know, they believe the myth of American democracy, that it'll always just be here, so we can do whatever we want and it'll be fine. Or maybe they just don't care. I don't know. I don't live that life, but I think it's important to call that out as well.
Okay, and Sarah?
First of all, Marilyn's made this point twice, and actually it's a really, really good one. This idea of like, that American democracy, we somehow have like pixie dust in our veins that makes us like not susceptible to what other countries could go through, and that democracy could be threatened. I do think it's important to acknowledge that, like, now I believe in American exceptionalism, and I do think that we are, I like I said, I'm bullish on America all the time, but like, you have to defend it actively. And if anybody would like to be scared with me, I'm happy to take you there, which is, you know, when you talk about institutions holding, we should always be optimistic about the fact that we just went through an election in the middle of a pandemic, and 7 million more Americans, we had the highest turnout ever. Yes, 11 million more people voted for Donald Trump, but Joe Biden received more votes than Barack Obama in that historic election. Like, enough people turned out to ensure that the democracy could survive and voted for Joe Biden, many of whom were far more progressive than Joe Biden or far to the right of Joe Biden, and all voted for him. Came together in the broadest pro-democracy coalition imaginable to ensure that Donald Trump did not get a second term. That's a win. On the flip side, the people like Kevin McCarthy, who do not support the commission, who blazed the path back to Mar-a-Lago to ensure that after Donald Trump incited the insurrection, he still got to be the head of the party, because Kevin McCarthy has no idea how to lead without Donald Trump. Kevin McCarthy is very likely going to be the next Speaker of the House. The election that is going to happen in 16 months or wherever we are, I mean, Republicans might be able to take the House back through redistricting alone. And so I think that if we can have a crass political conversation at some point, if anybody's interested, but I have a concern that Republicans are going to learn a lot of bad lessons from this moment, because I still think that they can run going into 2022, who is more motivated to turn out? Is it the group of people who think that an election was just stolen from them? I think maybe so. And I think that's why it's the Republican strategy and why they're sort of post-truth, why they're willing to lie to people, because it is about political power. And just the last thing I'll say on the notion of truth, which is, when people live in kind of a post-truth nihilism, that is when authoritarianism can slip in, because people don't know what to believe. And that's sometimes when they reach for the strong man.
All right, so I would like to continue this on and Sarah, I love the way you termed it, post-truth nihilism. I think that really captures sort of part of what we're after today. But I think there are a couple of things, and there's also something that Marilyn said that I would like to sort of extend a little bit, and that is that we often think of sort of history is written by the winners, and that as the narrative changes, that also sometimes signals an underlying shift in power, shift in social power, shift in political power, and to other people that can be threatening. Right? Because if you see your power ebbing or declining and you say, where do I now fit in this new order? That kind of fear can be both, extremely beguiling to demagogic politicians and also a very powerful motivator for actions that might take you outside of what you might think yourself as sort of normally constrained by. And so one of the questions I have, and this gets also to Bob's point about the lack of civil society, which Jeff and by the way, it's still on political science comps, tell us about Putnam, is where then can we have these kinds of discussions that enable a dialogue about American society that is disconnected from, or the sort of the tug and haul of partisan politics, because it seems to me that part of the problem is that our notions of truth are now political litmus tests, and so it's very hard to have a dialogue about truth because everything is so fraught. And so, do you guys see any place where we can begin to have that dialogue or replace the missing Elks Club? And I'll just throw that out to Bob. Would you care to take this up?
I don't have an answer for you, and I think we have to continue to try. I think, again, let's go to the whole role of elites, which is, there has to be somewhere, some leadership in the society recognized as such that is not viewed as, so corrupted by partisan interest, partisan motivation, partisan objectives, that can carve out some space for this kind of conversation. The reason I started off by saying I don't know how that happens, or sort of, that is to say, I know it can happen in some locations to some extent. How effective it can be across the country as a whole, really having a significant effect on public opinion and the willingness of the two sides of the Great Divide, or the multiple sides of the Great Divides, to come together, that I'm really I'm less sure about. One of the striking statistic, and I've seen it enough that I don't know that it's untrue. In other words, I don't know that I'm overstating it or understating it. I think I've seen it duplicated several places. Sarah, as somebody who has more exposure to public opinion polling and probably a better recollection of it than I do, can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have now a country in which parents set as a goal for their children that they not marry somebody from the other party. It's pretty striking, right? That I would think to myself, my son or a daughter, my God, there are any number of things I could wish for them, but please don't bring a Republican home. And when you think about it, and I think that's a change, I don't think that really rated very high as a parental concern, but I think it gives you an idea of how hard this is going to be. I don't know, Sarah, is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, it used to be, people would be more disappointed. They had their biases were different. It might have been racial, it might have been sexuality, like don't come home and tell me you're, gay. And now it's like, I don't care if you're gay. I don't care who you, just don't let it be a Republican. I'm pretty sure that's how my father-in-law felt.
Marilyn, then Jeff.
I don't know. I think there's still a fair bit of "don't bring a black girl home" going on that is far more troubling for me than I don't know. And again, this is Black woman talking. To me, I have a hard time imagining that I would have married a hardline Republican. I do have a hard time imagining that. I have a hard time imagining that I could have married or brought home to my mother someone who would have ever in any way, shape, or form spoken in a way like some Trump supporters spoke about members of our community. I have a hard time with that. And maybe it's turning into a political divide, but I think it's, I don't know. There are, I'm struggling with this because I don't think, I'm thinking my own kids, I'm like, would I mind if they brought a Republican home? If that Republican undermined the existence of my kid, yes, I would. And I don't think that's inappropriate in any way, shape, or form. And there are strains, not all Republicans, but there are strains of conservatism that at times deny the humanity of other people. And I do not want that for my child. And I stand in that. I stand in that truth, not because I dislike other people, but because I would never want my child's humanity to be questioned by someone who professes to love them. Does that make any sense? It doesn't. I'm just trying to, and I've seen it. I just don't know how I've seen those marriages. I've seen those unions, and I just there are times when I hear things that so fundamentally deny the humanity of another person that I would absolutely stand on. Don't bring that to my house. I don't want in my home someone that hates gay people because they are gay. I don't want that. And I think that's not a bad value to have. And it's not a value. And I know Jeff talks about having colleagues who have voted for, who are on the other side, but and I'm going to ruin this, but and now I can't think of his name. James Baldwin, our ability to disagree about certain things has to end at my humanity. We can't have a debate over my existence as a woman, as a Black woman, my right to all the things that my husband, who is very white, has. We can't have a disagreement over those things. That is, in my mind, that is not love. that cannot pass. So when you ask that question, I'm thinking of it in terms of, would this be someone who thinks that I should make less than him? Is this someone that thinks that my place is only in this house and not to be ambitious? No, I don't want that for my kids. I don't want that in my house. And I have no problem saying that at all.
Okay, Jeff? I think Jeff is working on
Yeah, my audio cut out. I don't know what happened. So sorry about that. This is just the day of technical difficulties. We really need to invest in broadband at the capital of the Colorado. Yeah, anyway, so can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because now it just changed to my ears again. That's great. My laptop. So I love everything Marlene said. I read a great thing recently that said we need to be tolerant of everything except intolerance. Intolerance is its own category of things that we need to reject outright. I think one of the damaging narratives that we have in society today is that we are defining each party by the folks who are the most extreme members of that party. And I think it's happening on the left and the right. And I think there is a lot of common ground we could find if we would have the conversations that we needed to have. And frankly, there's a lot of, I had a wonderful discussion this morning with a Republican colleague of mine who is a very, very smart woman, but who doesn't like the way that privilege has been presented to her as a white woman, and what it means to be white and what privilege means has just never been like that. The way that conversation has happened around her has just pushed her further and further away from an understanding that she is totally capable of having. And I think we need to be able to have conversations about these sorts of things in ways that are less alienating. And that the messenger is a piece of that, language is a piece of that. At the same time, we need to recognize that like things have been really, really bad for a whole lot of people for a really long time, and changing who gets to speak and who has the narrative and who gets the microphone is something that we absolutely have to do. We are at a point of great tension, and my hope is that, again, we fall on the right side of the knife's edge on this. But I think that the place for those conversations and those engagements to happen, I think Bob said that the political elites need to be part of this. I think it's super dangerous that Mitch is going to Mitch. I mean, we used to have leaders that presidents on both sides of the aisle could reach out to in Congress and work with. And Mitch McConnell recently, he said, his number one goal with Barack Obama was to make sure he was a one-term president. He said the same thing about Joe Biden, that you have to put your country first. Mitch McConnell's number one goal should be that America does better in 4 years than it's doing right now. That should be his number one goal. That should be the number one goal of everyone who is elected to any position in the entire country. I don't care what party you are. That has to be the base. And frankly, the people need to demand that's the base. If I go around, even in a Democratic primary, I won a Democratic primary, and this was 16, so maybe things have changed, but I won a Democratic primary saying, I'm going to work with Republicans. I'm going to go there. I'm actually going to improve people's lives. When Trump was elected, I said publicly, I really hope he is a successful president, because his success means America's success. And we have gotten away from this idea that we're all in this together. And again, the number one goal of Mitch McConnell should be to make America a better place. And that is just a fundamentally broken system when politics matters more than country. We're in a great place here in Colorado. My colleagues care way more about the state than they do about political victories. Thank God, because they could be making my life a lot worse than it is right now. But at least we can agree that it's putting our the people we represent first. And we disagree sometimes on how we do that, right? We disagree on what it looks like and what the mechanisms are. But we at least agree that we want to improve the lives of the people we represent. And that's got to be the base. And we've lost that in a fundamental way in Washington.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that have come out of this that I find really interesting. One is the absence of civil society, and in some ways, what a lot of what we see as civil society is also becoming sort of drawn in and politicized in ways that I don't think are healthy for American politics. And so I'll just throw this out. After Georgia passed its new voting restrictions, Major League Baseball is pressured to pull out. And so what you have is a private association that is now being drawn into as an instrument of partisan politics in a way that deprives it from playing what I'll call an autonomous leadership role in this. And so I think that this is can be seen as a very dangerous trend in American politics. And so I agree that civil society is going to be key. I also think that the point that you guys brought out about elites and political elites helping to lead the conversation is really important. But I want to throw one more thing out there, and especially because Marilyn and Bob are on the panel. How does this, the idea of the search for truth affect and the disagreement about truth affect the rule of law? And the reason why I raise this question is that we actually create courts as an institution designed to determine truth, right? And so, when there's, the idea of electoral fraud, well, prove it in court. every trial involves fact-finding. And so the purpose of the courts, the purpose of our judicial branch, in many ways, is a truth-finding branch. And so does the fact that we are beginning to sort of miss other parts of society to help us work out what truth is, and that does that then also endanger the rule of law as well, because a lot of that gets pushed into the courts where it may not be accepted. And I don't know, Bob or Marilyn, I'd like to start with one of you, and then get the other diagonal on my screen.
I'm going to defer to the judge to be, but I'll come in right behind her.
Okay.
I have been thinking a lot about obviously courts. That's why I'm running for judge. Not to overstate the obvious. But one of the things that I think is really important is building confidence within the judiciary system. And I've been talking very intentionally about the idea that it is very difficult to have confidence in a system that doesn't reflect the community that it serves, right? I live here in Lehigh County. Allentown has more than a 50% Latinx population. We only elected our first Latinx judge 2 years ago. They didn't just get here, they've been here for some time. And a lot of people passing through our system for many years have been Black and brown, but that has not been reflected in our judiciary, in our police force, in any of our court system. And there's a building block there that I think is really important that we've been missing in many aspects of our country for quite a long time, which is having diversity. I know it's such a scary word to people within our systems, right? So that when people show up who look like me and are in the system, it doesn't mean that the result changes or that the facts are any different, but it does change an individual's perception of whether they've been heard. It can change how they've been approached by the system. And that's, to me, a fundamental building block thing that we haven't always thought about. In our country, we haven't always addressed in an intentional way. I think once you've got that, then you can take the further step of beginning to, find truth. And yes, it's one of the nice things about what I do. There are facts. And what judges often do is force attorneys to come together and say, what are your shared facts? Before you come to trial, we're not going to have a trial about everything. You should get together, plaintiff's attorney, defense attorney, and give me your list of shared facts. There's that forced coming together to talk about whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 things that we can agree on. And then we'll fight about the other things. But there's something beautiful about that process of forcing people to just talk about it and figure out what can we agree on so we can move forward. That happens within the court system that perhaps needs to be emulated in our body politic, to use a Kenyan phrase.
Okay, Bob.
So I think the rule of law is under tremendous pressure from the same polarizing forces and institutional weakening that we've been discussing. The question for me is not whether the courts will be a place where people will agree the truth emerges, but whether whatever the outcomes, the role that the judiciary plays will be treated as a legitimately exercised role, that the outcome is one that people can accept. So in that sense, it tracks the whole concern that we have about people accepting the outcome of the electoral process. So then you think about the former president, and by the way, we've had other presidents who've had rule of law issues, and Richard Nixon certainly was one of them, but I'll just go back to Trump briefly here. Lyndon Johnson, if you want, had those issues. So let me I'm not trying to be partisan here, but in our most recent experience, earned or provoked a rebuke from the Chief Justice of the United States, who was a Republican appointee, for basically declaring that decisions followed whoever happened to be, which of the judges happened to have been appointed by Democrats and which had been appointed by Republicans. And Chief Justice Robert issued a statement saying there are no Obama judges and there are no Trump judges. They're all judges and they're all administering the rule of law. But the exchange is one that we have to take seriously as exposing a real problem, which is that a leader of the United States suggested that, very aggressively asserted it, and the Chief Justice of the United States had to push back on it. And I think this whole question of, is the polarizing force that we're dealing with going to overcome our perception of people's acceptance of the legitimacy of our judicial institutions? I mean, that is a very, very serious problem. And then there's a whole set of other issues I won't go into about the legal profession itself. I'm sure Marlene has views on that too. But I think we've seen some disturbing trends in the profession in the last several decades, which I think has weakened the leadership role that I think lawyers as a class, speaking of civil society again, as a professional grouping can play. And I think that's been very unfortunate as well.
Okay, Jeff, then Sarah.
The question of trust and truth is not just limited to the judiciary. The fact that it is now becoming a question in the judiciary is, I think, actually a new and really disturbing kind of thing. I think for a long time, people trusted that the courts were making decisions based on facts. We're not part of the partisan fights that we have in the other two branches. And I'm seeing more and more. And I know that you're elected as judge, and that's awesome. But it was seen as not partisan for a very long time. Just the judiciary generally, especially the federal judiciary, especially in particular the Supreme Court, we're losing that. And I think it's a reflection of the loss of trust in institutions generally, but I think it's also a reflection of the intense polarization and the partisanship that we're seeing in Congress. We had the Gang of 14 when I worked for Ken Salazar in the US Senate for a year. I handled military and small business policy, and Ken was part of that Gang of 14 that came together and said, look, we need judges. We don't have enough on the bench. Things are slowing down. We're going to get together, find the people that everyone can agree on, and get it done. And that kind of compromise, that kind of finding a way forward in Washington has, for the most part, gone away. And that has poisoned in many ways how we see the judiciary as well. And this is, bottom line, the number one biggest challenge that I think we face right now as a government is trust, and the lack of trust that we have. We need more transparency, we need more accountability, we need more effectiveness. And that should be the goal, again, of everyone who's elected, unless for some reason you think that we're all better off if people don't trust the government. But as Sarah said, that leads down a very, very dangerous path. When people vote for the stick of dynamite because they think the government doesn't work, you can end up with very, very dangerous outcomes that, for the most part, Americans just don't. We have had the privilege not to see how bad it can really get if we allow it to. So I think it is the responsibility of every elected official to try and rebuild that trust.
Okay, and Sarah.
Yeah, I sort of thought this is where Jeff was going, but he didn't quite, which is, he sort of talked about the collapse of institutions like across the board. And I think that this is, and I'll actually say, I don't know, the judiciary is kind of held up. I mean, I'm not as bearish on that. During the last election, they were the bulwark, the last bastion of democracy, and they were great. And people you saw the media was able to kind of lean on the fact that Trump had appointed these judges, and these judges acquitted themselves extremely well. And in fact, I've gotten to know a number of people who were involved in the last election, secretaries of state, whatnot, like tremendous pressure was brought to bear on people, and a whole bunch of people did the right thing, down to like the city canvassers who were just there to rubber stamp the process. And so I don't want to go overboard in distress, but I will say, but the other institutions, right? The church, the university level, I mean, everything, I don't know, you name it. Like, you name it, the parts of civil society. I think Bob hit on this early, and it's newspapers. Like, when I talk to these voters, like, they think everything's corrupt. And the fact is, a lot of these institutions have done things, like there's been active things that have happened to erode that trust. I mean, Bob named a bunch of Republicans, but Bill Clinton lied under oath. And, like there's been a bunch of things that have happened over the last 41 years that I've been alive, where I've watched us go from like the heyday of the Reagan years and the wall came down and a lot of optimism, Cold War ends, and to this place now. I mean, part of my optimism, I think, is steeped in just the life experience that I've had. I've never even seen inflation happen. I'd never seen a line at a gas station until a couple, last week. And so but I have watched the collapse of institutions across the board. And I think like you keep kind of asking, and we all just keep restating problems. Like, what is the answer? The answer is for us to all be better, to do better. I mean, Jeff sort of just said this about elected officials, but it's across the board. I think all of us have lowered our standards for what's expected of us. When we go on Twitter and behave like toddlers, and there's where are the adults? And like, why aren't they at the Department of Justice? When you see that Bill Bauer was spending his last weeks trying to unmask a parody account that was critical of Devin Nunes, it just makes you think like, are we the grownups in the room or not? And I think that the answer is to demand more of people, demand more of ourselves, and to recognize that democracy is both precious and not guaranteed, and to fight for it as hard as we can.
All right. Well, that forms a nice pivot point, right? Because I think one of the things we've done is we've actually established.
That sounded like a mic drop to me, Professor Rowe. That was great.
Yeah, it was great. And so I think that we've, I actually really like the conversation that we've had, because we've really, I think, keyed in on some really key things, trust, truth, the civil society and how, it and other institutions that we used to rely on for democracy have eroded. And so, but the question then becomes, all right, but so what? And so what in the following way, and it goes back to something Sarah mentioned very early on in the conversation, which was that lots of people voted for Joe Biden to begin to fix just these problems, right? This is why he was the most popularly elected president in American history. And so, one of the questions is one, how's he doing, right? From your view, is he up to the task of actually delivering on what he promised, which was a kind of restoration of, and I think restoration is probably not the right word, because there were too many problems in earlier versions of American democracy, but at least a return to an idea of politics as a kind of search for common good. And so, how, in your view, is he doing? What is he doing well? What is his administration not doing well? What challenges does it face? And does anybody want to jump in and start?
I'll go. Go. No. After you.
All right, Marilyn, you go.
I'm going to give you my scorching Biden take. One of the things about Biden that really irked me to no end was this idea of, elect me, we'll break the fever and we'll be fine. And that was a pitch that worked for many, many people. The idea that we'll go back to how things were, as if, a lot of people didn't remember how things were or didn't remember how things were during the Obama administration when Mitch McConnell then had the sole goal of making sure he wasn't successful in anything, having the goal of kind of return to norms as if the norms were good enough. And my fear, and I will tell you, I've largely not paid attention to Biden because I've been otherwise distracted. But I'm going to come back to that for a second. My fear is that he gets quiet. He gets passivity. He restores calm, but that's not necessarily better. and a lot of people will tell you, no, I don't want to return to what things were like Obama era or even before that, because, hey, it wasn't great for me because race, gender, ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that his moderate nature might not be good enough for our times for a number of people. So that's my big fear, is that he's not equipped to, maybe for the moment, in this fundamental way, because he's approaching this from a position of privilege, of thinking that the Obama years were the good old years, and for a great portion of our population, they weren't, and so that's my fear. The other thing with Biden, I think he has been both good and quite bad for our country at the same time in this sense. Good in that I do not watch my Twitter feed. I do not feel a constant need. What's he doing? What's he going? That my anxiety as a general proposition is not as high day to day. I remember in the very early days of Trump, I thought, are we going to be at war with North Korea? I mean, there was like a constant rat-a-tat-tat of problems. You don't get that now, but I think it can wallpaper over some serious issues that we have in this country that we were finally beginning to pay attention to. And quiet isn't always better. And that's my fear with him, is that he's just looking for everyone to be quiet. It's like when you put your kids in the other room, and my daughter made a sort of showing, if you saw her here. And sometimes you just want your kids to be quiet in the other room, but who the hell knows what's going on in there? They might be burning the place down, and you need to know. And maybe that friction is ultimately good for this country, that we need that friction, that's how we started to begin having these conversations that we've needed to have, because we were all stuck in our houses and we couldn't go anywhere, and we watched a man be killed. Then we were ready to have a conversation about policing in our country. Only then. Now, if we're kind of going back to getting out, taking off our masks, we're really excited and we're quiet, maybe we're not having those conversations, and we're not making the strides. We're not having the conversations that we need to have. So my anxiety is better, but I'm very concerned that that's maybe not the ultimate goal that we should be shooting for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That
makes perfect sense, right? Because there's the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? That we return to an era that looks like normal politics, and all of the problems that we've identified just get put on the back burner, and they fester and sometimes worsen until they blow up. And so, but Jeff.
Thank you. That reminded me of bread and circus. That in some ways, taking off the masks is giving the people bread and circus. Really hear all of those critiques, and I think there's absolutely a danger that we take all the progress, all the awareness that has been raised over the last year, and we don't execute on it. We don't make the changes we need to make in response to that. In Colorado, we were the first state to pass a comprehensive police reform bill. We have an update to that this year. We have a bill this year to make it so that any offense that is not a felony is not arrestable, unless the person is committing a violent crime, is a threat to someone else, or will continue to offend. So we are we're turning down the temperature in police interactions. Like, we're doing the work here in Colorado. I would love to see that happen at a federal level. I think that Biden is on the right path to for some kind of broader healing from Trump. I think, I'm not checking my Twitter feed. I also feel my anxiety is way down. I don't feel compelled to check the front page of the newspaper every day. I did my best to avoid federal politics during the last 4 years because I got enough going on in Colorado. But that was more of a defense mechanism, and now it's more of a I can breathe easy. The programs that Biden is working on are primarily funding based, and I think there's an expectation in America now that he's going to have opposition. But I think in some ways, in the Obama era, the administration tried really hard to negotiate, even before they started negotiations, to try and get folks on board. And I think what we've seen so far in this administration and in this congressional leadership is a willingness to do what needs to be done, in knowing that we may only get 35 Republicans in the House when we do it, and we may get 0 Republicans in the Senate, because that's just how that leadership is locked down. And so I think that we're not going to see. I don't think we'll see Biden slowed down in the way that Obama was, with this desire for bipartisanship from the Senate, because I think Mitch is going to Mitch, and that is just accepted in American politics now. And what I've seen so far is a willingness to let him do that while also getting the job done, without sacrificing what it is that's core and key to what it is that he's trying to do. So I'm very, very optimistic on a number of fronts with this administration. It is at the same time important we continue to hold his feet to the fire. There was a limit that he was not going to raise on refugees that folks made it pretty clear he needed to raise that, and he responded the right way to that request. So far, I'm optimistic that he is doing what needs to be done and headed in the right direction.
Yeah. Bob, would you like to come in on this? You were close to the Biden campaign.
Yeah, no, I took a leave from NYU when I was on the Biden campaign. I was actually involved with the campaign from the very beginning. So I think I'm reasonably objective, but I can't promise I'm fully objective. I think very highly of the president. I worked in the administration, the Obama-Biden administration. So first of all, I'd start by saying, I think our expectations generally, and I've said this in completely unrelated context of what presidents can accomplish, are way out of whack with reality. We put tremendous pressure on them to be just extraordinary across the board, able to, in effect, leap, what was the phrase in the Superman shows, clear tall buildings in a single bound. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on administrations. It generates expectations that are very difficult to satisfy. I do think that this is a leadership style that is reassuring to people. At the same time that the initial domestic programs that he has proposed, and one of which has passed, are actually quite aggressive and involved a very substantial, and of course this is the reason why Republicans accuse him of being the edge of the spear of radical socialism, that these are programs that involve really significant outlays, call it investments, both in the recovery from the coronavirus, infrastructure, rebuilding the economy. And it's a lot to accomplish, and along with other things that we can identify that people would want to see him do, both to repair the damage from the Trump years and also to fulfill the expectation of those who elected him. It's a great deal to do in the period that with very staunch Republican opposition, as we see, in a period of effectively 18 months until the midterms in 2022. So when you think about the runway that's available to a new administration to do all the things that people would want to see a new administration do, and this isn't just true of the Biden administration, it's true of every administration, right? What have you done in your first 100 days? And how have you established your legacy? And in extremely short period of time on very complicated questions in a very polarized political environment. By that measure, I think the administration so far has performed well. Obviously, it's going to sit much better with Democrats than it will with Republicans. And that's probably even true with non-Trump Republicans who are, not keen on aspects of the president's domestic program. But I do think, given what he campaigned on, the style, the immediacy of the response to the virus, I think the effective administration of the vaccine distribution program, all of these represent, I think, meaningful accomplishments in a period of just a few months.
Sarah?
Yeah, I'm surprised you guys aren't positively giddy about Joe Biden. Like, not only, first, his number one attribute for me is that he was able to defeat Donald Trump. And I am look, I can't be certain about anything, but I am pretty certain he's the only Democrat that was going to beat Donald Trump. And I understand people's desire for faster progress on different types of leadership, but like, we live in a center-right country, like it or lump it, and Joe Biden was the only person in that field that was going to be able to take down Donald Trump and bring together the coalition he did. And just a quick recap, you look at the key states that he won: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. I mean, we're talking about this much. The reason Donald Trump was able to tell the lies that he is, because it was a very close election. It wasn't close in the sense that Joe Biden won a lot of states, but they were by very narrow margins. And we are living right now on the edge. Like, the reason, maybe I sound exercised, I feel exercised, because for me, I don't feel like the threat has passed at all. And you said something about it being boring. I have lived the last 2 months, I've been as anxious the last couple of months watching the Republican Party totally collapse into delusion as I was, maybe not quite going into the election, but like, I wouldn't say anything has subsided, other than I do feel certain instincts, my conservative instincts, kicking in when I see the dollar, when I see the number of zeros on these spending bills. To Bob's point, I think that Joe Biden, who really campaigned as a moderate and is sort of temperamentally moderate, but he is governing as a very old school, big spending liberal. And he is just chucking money at the problem. And I feel like, I mean, I'm nervous about that. I think that I don't think that you should just spend money you don't have. I think he's going to be pushed into having to raise taxes, and I think that's not going to be particularly popular. But I do think that Joe Biden is demonstrating a commitment to democracy in ways that I find good and healthy. I think on a policy matter, I disagree mostly a lot. I am in a phase of my political life, though, where I'm willing to say, well, I guess we're rolling the dice on inflation here. And you know what? If we go through this period of this massive spending and it actually does juice the economy and we come out in a better place with low unemployment, like, I'll reevaluate some of my economic political beliefs. So we'll see. But I just I hope that Democrats don't lose their sense of urgency about the moment. And I think that if 3 years from now, there's going to be another election. I just saw a poll today, 48% of Republicans want Donald Trump to be the nominee in 2024. Joe Biden will be 82 years old, I think, at that point. Like, we have to I don't know, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, Sarah, I want to come back to you for a second. We're going to put policy aside, right? Okay, so you have a set of conservative policy principles, but you are really concerned about what I'll call the pro-democratic sort of things that Biden can do. And so, from your perspective, what is what do you see as the most effective things that Biden may be able to do that would strengthen the weakened democratic norms and institutions that we've experienced over the last, over the last several years?
Yeah. Well, Bob Bauer's got a really good book about this that he may want to talk about, and I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but I learned a lot of it from Bob and Jack and some of the work that they've done. But somebody just held a mirror up to us and let us see, like, what happens if you leave things up to norms? And we saw that there's a bunch of things like not going to release your tax returns. You're going to install your family in the White House. You're going to enrich yourself personally off of being president of the United States. So I think that I would like Joe Biden. Oops. Sorry, I got a phone call. Sorry, it's like on my iPad. Apologies. I would like Joe Biden to have a pro-democracy agenda. Like, I would like there to be a set of bills that they are putting forward that says, you got to release your tax returns so that we know who you're beholden to. We want to know if you're beholden to a foreign entity. There is a whole bunch of things that can happen at DOJ, and I'm going to definitely let Bob talk about that stuff because he's an expert. But there are just, I think that because we're in the middle of a pandemic, because we're coming out of an economic crisis, what I don't want to get lost is the fact that there was a democracy crisis that we experienced and narrowly avoided, and that there are a bunch of things that we have to do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And the window of time to do them is extremely limited.
Okay, Bob, since Sarah sort of kicked the ball over into your court.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. I feel very strongly about this. As Sarah knows, Jack Goldsmith and I wrote a book about post-Trump reforms. I'm quick to say, by the way, that each chapter accounts at the first section for the way in which prior presidencies prepared the ground for some of what was exceptional in Donald Trump's behavior, meaning he wasn't writing from a completely blank slate. That he exposed some weaknesses in the legal and other constraints, and particularly the constraints that norms provide that Sarah mentioned. He exposed them in a way that no president before him ever has done. And so you can go through, and Sarah mentioned a number of them, whether it is financial transparency, the absence of adequate conflict of interest regulation, the abuse of the pardon power, the politicization of the Department of Justice, the abuse of the vacancy laws to run a government he said that he preferred to have run on an acting basis, bypassing the advice and consent to confirmation process. I mean, there's a significant, it's a 400-page book. There's an awful lot to cover in this area. And I could not agree more that we've had a democracy crisis. Every now and then we are brought face to face with the weaknesses in these legal and normative constraints. And it is very discouraging to think that we're going to walk away from this thinking, well, he lost the election. And so what do we have to worry about? He was sort of sui generis, he one of a kind. We won't have to face this again. And that's a huge mistake to imagine that that's true. And so I think that over the next several months, I very much hope that reform initiative and that attention to these particular issues can be revived. But I agree with the characterization of a democracy crisis. And I think we, for good reasons in many respects, because of the pandemic, as Sarah said, but I think we are also, to get back to something that I think Marilena said, we have a tendency to think everything's just going to work out fine. Yeah, there was a bump, but we got past it. We have to work much harder, to go back to something that Sarah said. We have to work much harder. We have to be active in defending these institutions and repairing them where they look like they're broken.
All right, well, I want to sort of shift slightly because Bob and Sarah, you were mostly talking about the presidency, but we can also look at the Congress as an institution that may not work as smoothly as we would like, or the institution of voting or systems of voting as also places where we might need to see democratic reform. And so, but the problem here, of course, is that that anytime you begin to start tinkering with institutions, people think that you're not just simply trying to be pro-democracy, but that you're also trying to sort of put your finger on the scale to advantage your interests as well. But how important are these other reforms? Reforms in voting, reforms to sort of like HR1, or sort of thinking, rethinking the Electoral College. And so, Marilyn, Jeff, do you want to come in on these?
Something Bob said and Sarah said struck something in me. We talked about norm breaking, all the norm breaking that happened. And I want to talk about the degree to which the norm breaking was permitted to occur. You can have an actor do all sorts of crazy things, and that could have been stopped. We had, 4+ years to shut that down, and that didn't happen. And I really want to shift, not just for my own mental health, but for lots of reasons. I want to shift the attention away from the single actor and to the response to the single actor, which was lacking. It was lacking. There were the tepid, there were the phases of responses. There was the wave of, I didn't see it. I wasn't watching the social media. I don't read his Twitter, as if they weren't all constantly reading Twitter all the time. There was the avoidance version. Then there was the wagging the finger that was really horrible, but not really doing anything about it, or the wagging the finger, and then voting for any and all policies that came along, no real consequences for it, right? I often relay things to my children because I spend a lot of time mothering my kids. But if I just say, oh, don't do that, and then I go, ha, 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 and then walk away, my children will keep doing stuff I don't want them to do. There have to be real consequences. And we talk about, this democracy, and Bob's absolutely right. It's been exposed in some ways. I think the ideal has always been very, very good. And in that way, I probably fall more into the American exceptionalism. But in practice, we've relied on people just doing things because that's how we started it. And we'll just, norms, and, 2 terms, you'll just step down because that's what the first guys did. And, once someone was bold enough to say, well, I don't have to do that. No one's going to make me give you my taxes. Someone was just bold enough to try it. And I'm still not sure why it took so long for it to happen. When I think back on it, why it took so long for someone to kind of touch the stove and see if it was really hot. But I don't know that we as a nation really reacted terribly well to it. I know as a Congress, I think we could have done better, could have done more long before we got to January 6th. So I laid that as more so at the feet of a Congress that allowed the breaking of norms little by little, then bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time, than I probably do at the actors' feet.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, I think Congress had a long time to do something and didn't. And that is a violation of what the founders thought was going to happen, right? We have these 3 branches with the idea that they're going to constantly be competing for power. And when one of them takes too much power, when America thinks the presidency can leap tall buildings in a single bound, Congress is there to go, oh, no, no, no. We're the ones who leap tall buildings in a single bound. That guy doesn't have any power. And then the courts are there to settle it and say, neither of you actually jump over buildings. You make laws, stop doing this. And somehow that's broken down. And man, I hate to just harp on Mitch McConnell, but it's actually not just Mitch McConnell's fault. I think it's the Democrats' fault. A great example of this is Neil Gorsuch was always going to get confirmed. He was always going to be on the Supreme Court. And we blew the filibuster on him, blew it. And then Kavanaugh comes along, we've lost the filibuster. That was a mistake that we made, blowing the filibuster on Gorsuch and not saving it for a time when we needed to keep someone off the court, frankly, for like some really legitimate reasons. And we could have kept him off the court. There would have been another conservative, there's no question, but it wouldn't have been him for like a really good reason. And we lost it. So there is a real moral failing that I think we need to hold our own Democratic leaders accountable for failing to stand up and fight the way we needed them to stand up and fight in a smart way, right? And this is the children of light and children of darkness. This is Reinhold Niebuhr. This is taking seriously the fact that there are children of darkness out there. And the worst thing you can be is not a child of darkness. The worst thing you can be is a stupid child of light who doesn't take seriously the fight that you are in and how important it is for everyone to win. And that goes back to moderns and ancients, right? That goes back to Machiavelli and the way that we were taught Machiavelli, which is that the reason you have to be the biggest badass in the country is so that everyone else doesn't have to worry about losing their farms and homes to a war, right? Like there are bigger stakes. And so you need to be better at politics and tougher, and you need to win to make sure that the folks that you govern are safe. And I feel like there's a real moral failing that, I want to keep blaming Mitch, but it's not just Mitch. I think we need to be better, and we haven't been better. And that was not at all what I had actually intended to answer. The election reforms, I think, there's another great book called The Politics Industry by Catherine Gell and Michael Porter. And one of their big suggestions is something I actually just voted on, which is ranked choice voting. And so that was why I was gone for a bit. We're allowing ranked choice voting in municipal elections here in Colorado if the bill passes, which it will. And I think that change is one we need to make. If you look back at the progressive era, a lot of the same kinds of concerns and conversations were happening. We made a lot of election reforms. I think we're in a place now we need to make some of those election reforms now as well. And I think ranked choice is a great place to start, but not the end. So many more. Go read that book. It's a great book. There's some things wrong they get about politics, but generally a great book.
Okay, well, I will take that recommendation and add it to my summer reading list. I also have Bob's book. It's on my not just on my summer reading list, but actually on my dining room table. But it's been there for a while. My dining room table is a disaster, but that's a different story. Okay, but your conversation about norm enforcement raises a really interesting question, and I just want to make this observation. Because it's getting close to 8:30, and so we need to figure out a way of wrapping this up. Although I would be happy to talk all night. And that is that norms are only, I think, really effectively enforced when someone on your own side does it, right? Because the way to how do you know it's a norm and not just partisan interest? It's a norm when somebody who would otherwise have an interest in what you're doing says, no, that's wrong. And so I think, to me, one of the key problems that we confront, and I just want to raise this because I would also just like to give a shout out to Sarah, is that thinking about how we hold our own side accountable to the values we profess is going to be a really important part of restoring norms in American political life. And so I just wanted to make that observation, and then finally turn to sort of beginning to think about closing. Bob mentioned earlier, and we had some conversation about civil society. Well, one of the major parts of civil society is higher education. And so you guys are all familiar with Kenyon and places like Kenyon. What is it that we should be doing in order to help us sort of navigate toward a more hopeful future so that American exceptionalism continues? And I'll just open it up to whoever would like to throw in first.
Keep doing what you're doing, David.
No.
This is great. Go, Sarah.
So I will also put a plug in for Kenyon here, which I think is anytime I was talking to Bob on the phone the other day, and I said, we're gonna be on this panel together. And I proceeded to tell him Kenyon's the best. Kenyon does amazing things, but my honest answer is that I do think the challenges ahead of us are not for the faint of heart, and we cannot keep coddling students. There's a great book by John Haidt, if we're going to just throw out Greg Lukianoff, about coddling of the American mind. And I think that elite academies and institutions are doing way too much to allow people not to have really hard questions, not to engage people in debate. I think that the Kenyon Political Science Department does this wonderfully, but I just think that there's a lot of people graduating, a lot of students coming out of school today who are prepared to tell you how they feel. They're not necessarily prepared to back it up with telling you empirically why they think the things that they do. And we're going into just a very challenging, people are going to have to be able to stand their ground and articulate why they stand for the things they do. And also this commitment to first principles. There are more and more people are starting to melt a little bit on certain things like free speech and other places where civil rights and LGBT rights, that's all a product of free speech and free inquiry and not being afraid to have tough conversations and let people debate. And if you chill that, and if people are afraid to have those hard conversations, they both don't get the opportunity to grow. They don't get the opportunity to sharpen their arguments. And so I do think, these elite institutions need to keep pushing students so that they're prepared to defend this democracy.
Okay. Bob?
So I want to seal the bipartisan moment here, or at least on my part, say I completely agree with what Sarah just said. That is to say, I agree that I have 4 children, all of whom have gone through education. My daughter went to Kenyon, had a wonderful experience there, and all of them had wonderful educations, and they're very fortunate. I do agree that higher education has there's too much evidence of higher educational institutions that are catering to students and treating them as consumers rather than as students. I'll never forget having gone on one tour with my youngest, my youngest child, now no longer, it is now in his mid-20s. And after a lengthy tour in which the 24-hour pizza grill and the 24-hour video center and whatever were all profiled, we were told that the tour guide was very much appreciated the experience with us, and did we have any questions? And I asked, where's the library? It hadn't come up in the conversation. I also agree about the free speech point that Sarah made, but I want to add one more thing. And I guess this goes to political science departments, and that is the generation that I teach at NYU Law, and there are exceptions, so I'm speaking very broadly, but there's some empirical support for it, don't have a clear effective interest, and AFFECTIVE, not effective, but affective interest in institutions as institutions. Rather, they have an interest in outcomes. And I think that it goes to the question that you raised earlier, Professor Rowe, about being willing to take a position that ultimately leads to an outcome you're not happy with. And defensive institutions requires that. It requires a commitment to a democratic process that doesn't yield outcomes that you may want. And I have to say, I'm very worried about the generations, several generations now behind me, and the evidence that the argument about institutions doesn't have any particular appeal for them. And I hope that that is something that the institutions of higher education can do a better job of teaching.
Okay, Jeff, Marilyn, you.
Are you going?
Well, I'm just waiting for, seeing if anybody wants to jump in.
I always wonder when people talk about coddling of students, I wonder if we're in one of these moments where students that maybe look a little more like me are saying, hey, some of these things don't feel great. Hey, and there's not some of that shifting disquietude that comes with people who have not typically spoken up, speaking up. I think I'm probably unique in this group in that I'm probably one of the few minorities. I'm the only minority in this panel to have attended a predominantly white institution and can speak from that experience, which is not always an easy one. And I think it could have been different and better in some fundamental ways that I think should change. And I understand not coddling students, and I support that. And I understand the concept that we don't want to treat students like consumers, but when you're charging them $75,000 to $100,000 a year, they actually are consumers. And you're going to have to reckon with that. If you're going to charge that much money, you're going to have to reckon with that piece. But I just want to kind of pause and pull back and interrogate the idea of whether what's happening in terms of some of the sensitivity around students is that minority populations are speaking up and saying, this doesn't feel right. This has not been appropriate. Speaking to some systemic and longstanding issues within academia that need to be addressed. And I don't want to gloss over in a way, because it is easy for me. I'm far enough removed from Kenyon to the point that when I get back to Kenyon and someone's complaining about having to go walk all the way down to the big recreational facility, Lowry building, that I kind of go, how dare you? I get that. I understand that. I feel that within my soul. But some of these kids also have a point about what the experience as a marginalized individual within a community like Kenyon can be like, and ways that it should be different. So I just want, I don't know that I'm necessarily disagreeing with Sarah and Bob, but so much as I'm wanting to pull back and make sure that we're not glossing over in a way that feels like in the good old days when I went to college and we just, look, I can quote you comments written in my very first paper at Kenyon College from Professor Speakerman that I'm not sure if they scarred me or made me stronger. I'm still trying to work it out with my therapist, but I always want to be open to learning more and doing better in my life. And this is one of those areas when I hear oh, these kids are being coddled, they have it too easy. I always wonder, are we just not learning lessons? Are we just not being open to hearing from people that maybe we haven't been accustomed to hearing from? So I just want to be that person in the classroom that's like, well, maybe not.
All right. All right. Jeff.
So I like to give like clear, really actionable things for folks to do. So here's two. One, Kenyon was founded by an Episcopal bishop with the goal of educating the whole person. And I think we have in education across the board, the idea of helping people understand what it means to be a human being and how to relate to other human beings in ways that's not just through literature, right? But that is actual, maybe, dare I say it, moral formation, teaching people how to have hard conversations, how to disagree without being disagreeable. Educating the whole person is something that I think we need to take more seriously, especially at liberal arts institutions. That's kind of the whole reason you go, is for that, like, transformative kind of experience. It's not the knowledge transfer, right? If you just want the knowledge transfer, you go to Khan Academy. It's the experience at Kenyon that we're looking for. So take more seriously at Kenyon the whole person. And I said that when I was on the alumni council, as we were talking with the presidential search and things like this. Like, this is not a new thing for me. Take educating the whole person more seriously. And two, we used to have reading societies at Kenyon. Philomathesian, I had to look this other one up. I remembered Philomathesian though, and Nu Pi Kappa. And there are problematic histories with both of those, but restarting either new societies along those lines, or restarting those societies, recognizing the messy, the messy importation of the things that brings with it, and reckoning with that could be really helpful to students at Kenyon, to have those debating societies, to learn how to think about the issues that they care about, how to present them, how to defend them. I think that could be really helpful. So those are the two things: educate the whole person, restart Philomathesian, and Nu Pi Kappa.
All right. Well, thank you. With that, I would like to bring things to a close. I found the conversation this evening was actually, for me, quite fascinating. And I think that there are two themes that came out that really sort of sink deeply and are going to affect how I think about a lot of the problems we face. First, I want to note, I started by saying, hey, we're in this sort of murky situation. There's a sort of fog of knowledge. We can't really see the future. I'm not sure that I can still see the future any better. I just want to throw that out there. But I think, have a better understanding of some of the contours of the problems that we face. And there are two that came out, I think, in the conversation that are really important. One is the need to, find ways of creating a dialogue about truth, and that we can trust. And that's the second, right? And that requires, sort of the ability to engage in honest conversation, and conversation that's not driven by necessarily a political interest or a belief in a certain political outcome, but in a desire to, how do we structure our lives with one another so that we can, live reasonably well and free. And so I think truth and trust are things that are going to be key to what we see in the future. And so I would like to thank you all for just a fascinating conversation. I was, the questions I sent you ahead of time, and most of them we did not answer. And actually, there were very few that came through that came through my feed from the audience, because people were just rapt about what you guys were talking about. And so
Let's hope that's the case. Let's hope that's the reason.
I think it's mostly, yeah.
Crickets. I barely am making sense at this hour.
Well, I believe it to be the case, and unless I see hard data otherwise, that will be the truth of this panel. Okay, so Sarah, Bob, Jeff, Marilyn, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this panel. It's been for me a fascinating evening, and I'm sure for the audience as well. Before we go, I would just like to make one further thank you, and that is I would like to give a special thanks to Ross Ballard and Casey Majorovich, who are the people who put this technically together. Ross and Casey have been working with the CSAT all year, both on this series and on other major events that we've done, such as the Leopoldo Lopez Freedom and Democracy Award, and they have been fantastic. Both their technical expertise and artistic vision have made these events really, I think, shine. And so I would really like to give them a very sincere thanks. Everything that they have done makes what we do tonight seem effortless and appear seamless. And without them, tonight and all of the events that we've done this year would just be yet more buggy internet chats. And so I really do thank them greatly. And with that, I would like to again thank the panel. I would like to thank the audience, and I would like to wish everyone a good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.